So really good to see you. I'm glad you could find the time to come on over to MNN. It's really good. And in the audience, welcome very, very much to Conversations. An honor and a pleasure to welcome to the program Charles Rangel. He's the representative from New York City Congressional District 15 in the United States Congress. Has been there, I guess, since a long time now, 40 years or so. Back to the magic year 1970. He's represented that district and the nation very well. He has a wide-ranging interest in a great number of very important issues that we want to get to. And Charles Rangel, thank you very much for coming in to Public Access, which you and some of your colleagues have been so helpful in terms of giving support to this idea of public access cable television programming for the people, and I thank you for that.
Well, people like you give MNN the credibility that it needs, and it's a great honor for me to share the same platform with you. You've done so much good work over the years.
Well, sir, we've been doing this since about 1970, so you've been serving in that trench. I've been serving in a foxhole over at the corner there, but I think public access is a venue for the people, which is an interesting concept in terms of communication. I thank you for that. But you've got such a wide interest, and you've done so much, it's hard to know where to wade in to begin. But I've read on your website and so forth. I wonder, what is your thought? I could ask you a question as a lead-in because it's on everybody's mind on this March 23rd, 2011, Libya. We're involved in there very knee-deep in the big muddy, as they say, and so forth. And I wonder, maybe just as a lead-in, how is it that wars seem not to be the purview of Congress in order to have congressional authorization for something so serious as war seems not to be followed anymore? It's all an executive thing. And I wonder, how did that happen? And maybe you could address that issue at the outset. The war that's being fought hasn't been declared, hasn't been given an okay by Congress, as it seems to me the Constitution said it should. What's the story in terms of that in the recent experience?
Well, of course, I have objected to the president bypassing the Congress. People have tried to interpret this as me having a problem with President Obama, but not since Franklin Roosevelt have we had any president actually go to the Congress and ask for permission in order to send our men and women in harm's way. And we've had a half a dozen intrusions into other countries. You could not possibly see my involvement in combat in Korea as any more than a civil war. True, it was communists against so-called democracy there. And we went to Grenada for the airports, and we went to Panama because of drugs. But there's always an agenda. There's always a political agenda, or there's always something like oil in Iraq. There's always a reason other than humanitarianism, because we could spend the rest of every day that we're living if we just looked for injustices that take place. It's all over.
Yeah, everywhere.
And so whenever we have an opportunity to protect what is considered our interests, we find a reason for doing it. You know, when it came to Saddam Hussein, hardly anyone cared anything about him. True, but he didn't have anyone supporting his positions. And so I joined in with the rest and say, yes, he should go. And you take Gaddafi. When I heard that we should kill him, it was then that I said, Harold, you know, this could be the worst man in the world, but for us to be sending planes over to look to kill him and anyone else that's around him, first of all, it should not be a nation's goal to do it. Second, the president should consult, because there are so many questions that should be answered. You know, I represent a district that has many, many volunteers into the service. some of whom are not citizens, but they want a faster track for citizenship.
Sure.
So I go to more funerals from people who've died in Iraq than most people.
Yeah.
It is so awkward
Yeah.
when the family comes crying to me.
Yeah.
I represent the flag, the United States government.
That's right.
And they just say, Congressman, was my son a hero? I said, yes, ma'am, he was a hero.
Yeah.
Did my son die for this great country? Yes, ma'am, he died. What am I supposed to say? He died for oil, or he died because of the president? And so it just seems to me that we could avoid a whole lot of wars if everybody knew that when the president said go to war, we all have to make some sacrifice.
We certainly did in the Second War, didn't we?
Well, we did there, and
that was declared in the way the Constitution was written.
Exactly.
And does it matter how the Constitution is written if it can be got around, I guess, is the issue, or not? Is it clear that it's to be an act, it's to be if it's a war, a declaration
clear.
of the Congress is what's required by the constitutional
what
system we're to live
happens is
by.
that the president now with television has direct access to the people.
Yeah.
And I don't care who the president is, when you have a setting where the flag is there and he's talking to his fellow Americans.
Bully pulpit.
You're right. We have to, as Americans, you feel unpatriotic. That's why we have the Congress, because it's not that the Congress knows better than the president. The Congress shares it with America,
Right.
the constituents.
That's right.
Because they would want to know, why is my son going? Why are we killing somebody? What is America's interest? Now, we don't know that. There are just so many questions. This morning, I was at a press conference with your friend, Congresswoman Maloney, because of the cutbacks that we're having in social programs.
Yes.
Now, they are slashing programs in the Congress. And you know that just cutting spending is not saving money if the results of it is far more expensive than what you're cutting.
Exactly.
So if we're cutting health and education and housing, poverty is not going to go away. These people are going to get health care, and they're going to eat, and they got to get in trouble. So all of these things build up. But what's amazing to me, Harold, is where did we get the money so speedily to participate in the war in Libya?
It seems to be a blank check almost for things military. It seems. It's not to be questioned. Crystal City, you can write your ticket. There's a huge industrial complex, military industrial complex, Mr. Eisenhower warned us against.
You're right.
Are his warnings coming into being that you've got a part of the federal structure that is beyond any questioning or accounting or something of that sort? And again, back to the constitutional question, everything after the Second World War has been done by executive decree almost. And I'm just curious, why is it
because
the Congress hasn't asserted itself?
That's it.
It is. You
Yeah,
think
of
there
course
might be with
There's
the
no
congressional...
question about it. People, you know, they make up that there was a war in the Gulf situation with President Johnson. This president, I don't even think has gone as far as to say that is a question of national security, because it's hard to, you know, with the exception of the oil, which led us into Iraq. But it's difficult, but presidents stretch it to such a point that they would want us to believe that if we didn't do this, our national security
Well, they did
is there.
that. More recently, they did that in Iraq, did they not? I mean, with
Well, they
Hussein.
had weapons of mass destruction that were not found by anybody.
Does it teach us anything? That there can be... They have public relations or advertising industries that will try and tell us something in order to sell cornflakes rather than Wheaties. And so those techniques, and Vance Packard, who wrote The Hidden Persuaders, how they can persuade with emotional pleas, particularly multimedia, is very powerful.
It is powerful, but in addition to the military involvement, if you take a look at the expenditures for contracts that are associated with the military,
Huge.
This Blackwater thing is bigger than most nations.
I think there are more Blackwater people there than military in many places,
Probably.
and the military seems to be everywhere.
and they write
at great
their
cost.
ticket. And they're not subject to even our military justice system. They just do
That's
what
right,
they
yeah.
want wherever they do it.
Uh-huh.
You know, this thing is far beyond you and me. We're not going to find the answers to the important questions that you're asking. So maybe it's because I'm getting older, but it seems to me that our religious leaders are missing a great opportunity. Like you pointed out, if we find our government using the same advertising technique, the same mind-changing techniques to have us to believe that if we don't support them, then we're not patriotic,
Yeah.
why cannot we take the most valuable miracle that anyone can ever think of, no matter what faith they belong to, and that's human life. Human life,
Yeah,
right?
Exactly.
Now, if someone was to tell you that they were going to take your son, your grandson, and put his or her life in jeopardy.
Or your own young man,
Yes.
young lady, yes, huh?
And you just stop there and say, why?
Yes, right.
Why?
Yeah.
And it'd be better if you have a minister with you than having a lawyer with you, because
Yeah.
the lawyer may try to persuade. But there's nothing that you can explain as to why would you want to take someone's life. I mean, I don't know what Saddam Hussein, how bad he was. I assume that he was. But if you find that there was no weapons of mass destruction, if you find that the president's people were telling him to go to Afghanistan, but for whatever reason he was hell-bent to send our troops to Iraq,
Yeah.
then if there was a minister there to ask the questions that they do, how many lives are you going to take after you knock off Saddam Hussein?
Yeah, bring in an ethical context,
Exactly.
morality. Yeah.
Exactly.
I can remember back in the 70s, we used to be in Washington quite a little bit with the program, and Paul Wolfowitz was all hell-bent. They were thought of, the neocon
Yes.
contingent were thought of as, or deridedly called a lunatic fringe. They were not given any serious consideration. But he was talking in the 70s, we've got to attack Iraq. So it was there, and it was in a playbook that was there in those quarters. It seemed to become operative in terms of the executive branch.
There's no question. As a matter of fact, there were meetings of Canada, Great Britain, and the United States as it related to just cutting off the oil different supplies as to which ones would do the refining, which ones would be doing the drilling.
Yeah.
So they had a preconception about what they were going to do with the oil. And if you remember, sometimes Bush was saying that the profits from the oil would pay for our intrusion.
And we would
there.
be greeted as liberators.
Oh, God, rose petals in the street.
And they have, even on 60 Minutes, they had Curveball, who was somebody that they had relied on for giving this kind of a picture of that country, why it's in our vital interest to go, because they had weapons, and it was all made up out of whole cloth. We were just led around.
Suppose it was mandated that you had to address the families of the 5,000 brave young men and women
As you
that lost their
unfortunately
life.
often have to do.
What do you tell them? What can you tell them?
I know, yeah. Okay, well, that's an important... War and the taking of life is a big and important issue, and it's just of a concern. I see your colleague, Mr. Kucinich, is trying to bring it up. Will it have any, in terms of the current thing with Libya that's going on now? As I told you, I've been over there a few times and everything, and had done a program with Mu-Ammar Gaddafi. I have a different take on it than a lot of other people do.
I would like to ask you
there's a
couple of questions. You know, when we had this insurgency in Egypt, there was a group out there ready to do something. They were wannabe leaders that were there, and we knew who they were. They knew who we were. There's so many different groups in Libya, and I was just making believe that the Iranians wanted to take advantage of this situation. If the Iranians were able to get their people in there, allegedly for freedom, and win, what will we do?
You mean the people in Benghazi?
Yeah, I have no clue about who wins in Libya. Getting rid of Gaddafi is one thing, but you know more about the country than anyone I've met. What happens next? How do we win? Who's in charge?
Well, you're asking me big questions there that are beyond my ability to understand. How we deal with these large geopolitical issues and so forth.
I don't remember the president explaining it.
No, he changed on the dime. It seems to me somebody who could use public relations coaching would be Mr. Gaddafi himself. The nations of the world are gathering at the UN to put a no-fly zone where they can deliver all this firepower down. Everybody knows the firepower that can be delivered by tridents and so forth. And the man gets on the television. He says, I'm going to go into Benghazi and we're going to root out every son of a gun rat from every closet and so forth. He gave this talk. It was not good PR to do that. It helped, I think, change the president's mind, possibly, I think, at that very moment. So he could use some good PR himself and so forth. But the issue is really important because the fat's in the fire now, as they say. And we're raining down. We got the no-fly and all that kind of
What would have happened if that American pilot that had a malfunction and was greeted as a friend or a hero, suppose he was held hostage, suppose he was grabbed? Do you think that the Congress, for one moment, would not hesitate to try to rescue him?
Well, I don't know. We held hostage in Iran a number of people from the embassy. Such a thing can happen. People can take hostage. That's another kind of thing that goes on. But it's a very complex situation over there, and he's a complex. I think it's not in our interest to understand that there will be among the people of Libya, there's about 6 million, I guess now, there will be a lot of people who in their heart of hearts align with the man. Because he's being painted as always, it happens in wartime and so forth, as the personification of evil. And that's what happens and so forth. But his story would be one that he would have a lot of support. And it's interesting from who he gets support. He gets support from Daniel Ortega. He gets support from Hugo Chavez. He gets support from Evo Morales. He gets support from a great number of the American Indian nations that have not been treated well by European colonial attitude and our attitude toward them over the years. People who've been oppressed, by and large. The people who've been oppressed, Nelson Mandela had a great affection for him. And with those kind of people, it makes you wonder, why would anybody support him if he's as evil as he's seen, and he only holds power by fact that he has a ruthless ability to coerce everybody, which is a story that they had tried to have. I think that we may be in for a longer haul built upon the support that he would have among the Libyan people who support him wholeheartedly in their wholehearted way without just being coerced, and that's the story we're getting.
Well, patriotism is not confined to democracy in terms of a country wanting to be proud of its people. I could see easily that they may not think Gaddafi is everything they want, but he's theirs, he's their leader. And I'm surprised that you mentioned the Native Americans, because I agree with you. They have really been mistreated. But I don't
think we kept a single treaty.
No. Well,
they were treated shabbily by us.
That is, I mean, it's murderous, but
the American Indian nations, Vernon Bellecourt and the American Indian nations, and some of the people representing this hemisphere, Aboriginal people, they tend to be in support of him.
Well,
we could ask ourselves why.
I've never heard that, because I have worked very closely with Native Americans and trying to get them, with their newly found funds from casinos, to do a documentary on their history, much like Alex Haley did for Roots.
Wasn't it wonderful?
Except in this particular case, they were not discovered by some European. I mean, they can talk because no one is supposed to be the masters of oral history like they are.
Right, you're right.
And
you're absolutely right.
And the whole idea that we would actually kill these people deliberately and take their land and then sign the treaties, as you pointed out.
And ignore them.
And most Americans have no clue of the fact that these are sovereign nations.
Right.
And I remember once you were talking about public relations, there was a battle of property in upstate New York. We're going all over the lot, but you're so enjoyable. Yeah. And they had a Native American lawyer, and he was trying his best to act like Wall Street, and he was saying, I want the white people to know that they're my friends and brothers, and it's not our present intent to remove them from our property. I said, oh, my God, talking about, and he was so legally correct. Right. It was their land.
Well, one of my favorite lines is James Joyce had Daedalus say, history is a nightmare of injustice from which we're attempting to awaken. So injustice has been the rule of the day over a good part of human history, with a few powerful people lording it over people that were not treated very well.
Well, we, fortunately, after we took all that we could from the Mexicans, kind of did not have territorial ambitions like most countries. And I think that we can have a sense of pride in terms of the interventions we have had. The fact that they're not constitutional is a very, very serious problem, because presidents have mental problems too. I mean, the problems that we have today with depression among people of all standing is just
youth.
Yes,
you mean mental depression.
Exactly.
I heard that the youth are depressed.
Exactly.
The youth are supposed to be vibrant and idealistic.
Well,
and everything.
You take a look at the suicides. You know there's a direct connection between
I heard that
with
great chagrin the other night.
Yes,
from a report.
And so if you take away the stigma and just believe that as a president can catch cold and it leads to tuberculosis, he can also have a lot of mental strain and lose it, if you will. And if the Constitution is so distorted, or the political situation is such that a president doesn't go challenge because presidents before him had done the same thing, there's the checks and balances that we treasure are just shattered.
Well, it's a big question. I don't know where it comes out. It seems to be that's a pattern that seems to be having disassociated from certain prescriptions of the Constitution by fiat, or without going through the process of any kind of a way of clarifying the original document, or the political understanding of what is meant by democracy and the allocation of power within a society. Seems to me going to war is a major issue. No?
It's a moral issue, it's a constitutional issue, but the power of the pulpit, for the president to receive the support. And you know, when we start off with the Star-Spangled Banner, the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag, in God we trust, and then the president comes to greet you to tell you why we must correct an injustice. And the way it's framed is, my God, you don't want to be against correcting an injustice. And before you know it, 8 years pass, and we still are looking for weapons of mass destruction.
Yes, right. And thousands of troops, billions of treasure, and that sort of thing, and getting bogged down in now we're going to open another front. And I brought that up before, that there's going to be support for the man because there's so little knowledge. And yet I think there's basis for understanding that there will be wholehearted support, not coerced, by the people of Libya for what's happened after he made that revolution in 1969. That's the point. All of the statistics show incredible. They went from 0 literacy to 92%. They have the highest. All of the social indicators, education, women's liberation, all of the indications have been achieved in that country with the oil revenue that they have. They've spread it around. And there's also his way of thinking. They set up these people's congresses. They've set up a system of participatory democracy, where the whole country meets within conference halls like town hall meetings, of participatory democracy. And they've set up a system where the private sector, they had a private sector, they did that socially, they have a private sector, you could start a business, they'd help you up and so forth. They had a rule they were trying to adhere to, you couldn't hire anybody. Now, think about that. You couldn't hire anybody. The people who made up the company had to be owners of the capital base partners in the company. That's a huge notion on economic thinking that we may be confronting in the world, that he had a vision of, that he tried to implement. They were the poorest people in the world in 1969, a long way to go. But they've made a lot of progress in 40 years, and it's going to have to be reflected somewhere. But that idea that you're going to involve the population at large rather than the few people who've already got accumulated capital, which has been the history of the world, is a big one that may have resonancy beyond Libya as an example. I don't know if you can follow what I'm saying. But he had an ideology that was really worth considering, and he was supported by a great number of people who are, in their thinking of the world, concerned with the least among us, rather than trying to get a leg up to kiss the hem of the power du jour that had all the money and power historically, if you can follow what I'm saying.
I am. I'm going to have to research more so that I could participate at a higher level when we discuss it the next time we meet. But maybe you can help me in terms of, I was under the impression that the tribal identification had much heavier roots in Libya than it ever existed in Egypt.
Oh, yes, I would say so. I would. Yeah. There's three main tribes. Yeah.
So when you have that diversity, you have to have some differences, how deep they are. So right now, assuming that we reach our military international objective, who do we go to among the tribes to see now what will the new government look like?
Well, I wouldn't know really well. I don't know it real well. I've been there 6 or 7 times, did a program with him, and Ali Treki was a good source. He's trying to get into the United States to be the ambassador of Libya, having been appointed after the staff there has been let go by Muammar Gaddafi, who still recognizes the head of the country, but the United States apparently won't give him a visa. So he can't land at JFK to present his credentials to Ban Ki-moon, which is a question. Ramsey Clark said, how in the hell can you have a United Nations when the United States can work at that level? But no, there are 3 main confederation tribal for the Senussi in the east, and that was King Idris, who had been the head of the country in 51. They were the first country to become independent out of the Second War. In 1951, Libya. Then you have the Gaddafi in the west, and there's another large confederation of tribal identity in the south.
So who do we recognize? Who would the United Nations recognize?
Well, Benghazi was always, they never were able to cotton on much to Gaddafi, but it was, I think, along tribal lines. It's the Senussi tribe. King Idris was a king. The flag that they're flying is the flag of King Idris. They want to go back to a monarchy. It was a monarchy. And so there is that animosity at a tribal level. It's very important. It's hard to understand, but it's something out of which they came. They were the poorest people in the world. They were
share with me the Arab League. It was so important that Ambassador Susan Rice get their commitment before we pulled together this United Nations group to attack Gaddafi. Having said that, we don't hear that much from the Arabs on this issue. And clearly, we would not be involved at all if the Arabs did not want us to get rid of this guy.
One wonders if the mandate that they signed on to is the mandate that they're getting. That might be going on in terms of the Arab League membership. I think there's a number of people within the Arab world, or the Islamic world, or the larger world, is going to say, this is not what we signed on for. If there comes to be a civil war, which could happen. We had a civil war in this country over slavery, north-south. They have a civil war, east-west. Well, and if it becomes a war, a full-fledged war, instead of something that could be done in an instant, which they think might happen because he's so horrible, he's only, the propaganda, I think they might be in for a long, drawn-out war, east-west, between the Senussi and the Gaddafi.
But how could it be anything except a civil war? How could it be, even in Egypt, when you find a country divided and people have taken sides, and this is what's happening in Libya. There are at least 2 forces, and we have put the tribal people all together and the Gaddafi people all together. We are bombing the Gaddafi people innocent people as well, but that's the price of war. Having said that, if Gaddafi loses, who wins? And where are we? Who do we recognize? Who goes to the United Nations?
Well, that's no end game. They don't have. A lot of people object to that, geopoliticians and so forth. One of the things that's very disturbing in the world pattern, beyond that in a way, I just saw Belgium. Country of Belgium now is breaking down Walloon Flemish, and ethno-identity is rearing its head. We got 200 nations, more or less now, and the ethnic associations, tribal, if you will, it down to levels other than the nation state, which we thought, which we're comfortable with, it is beginning to become seriously being a source of contention, which would be a very, very splintering kind of thing to occur, like Yugoslavia or something at large, because at the tribal level, it's a whole nother thing, so there may be something going on.
Have you ever thought, as a professor and a scholar, what would happen if we had tribal inclinations in the great United States?
Right. But the Irish, yeah, right. Well, yeah, but those tribal inclinations and those are more important to human identity, and I think human identity is being threatened, maybe existentially. I don't know. You're in a position of great authority. I wish you could get me chapter and verse on just how destructive after 200,000 years of human evolution, are the weapons of destruction that do exist, not inflection points of theory of relativity or something, but they actually exist on hair trigger alert. How destructive are they? Are they species lethal still, despite START and despite the implosion of the Soviet Union? That's an existential new reality in the universe that we don't seem to pay enough attention to, much less the averse side of perhaps a liberating capability technology has that we're not able to relate to because we're reifying outdated institutions coming out of history.
I would love to explore as well what was the impact of the colonial designations of countries without any consideration of ethnic culture, language differences, and what happens now if a country seeks to find its identity?
Right.
What is left for them to work with?
Right.
And what role does that play?
And how do we deal with that kind of a world?
With them trying to have genocidal ideas about anybody that we can't tell the difference, but they can tell the clear difference that we have.
And it's very meaningful. And it seems to be emerging meaningful at the subnational level. It would seem. I don't know. In Libya, I think that's the case. Although there's also, you got to see, there's going to be economic interests. There are going to be people who want to get in on the deal and make a lot of money or something, as there always is within a political, context in that.
I have...
I mean, talking about Libya now.
I know, but I'm bringing it back to the United States, too, because I think either before the show or during the show, you had mentioned the Civil War and slavery in this country. And oft-time, it's accurately reported that everyone came here on a voluntary basis, with the exception of the slaves.
Oh, yeah.
But I don't understand, and you may have, in all of your scholarly works, come across the concept as how could possibly a handful of people in England dominate the entire world? And there's their footprints are everywhere.
Yeah.
And then to eradicate the history of the people from a continent so that
take away
African slaves have no names.
Yeah, they wipe out their identity.
Completely.
I think it was worse in North America than anywhere else in the hemisphere,
where
they wiped out the identity.
And you were trying to say that there could be a genetic thing within us that reaches out for who am I? And I just love listening to the Irish makeup.
Absolutely. We just passed St. Patrick's Day. God passed another one without getting late.
And here they have effectively, I read an article, which I've known since I was a kid, of the real number of blacks, people named Washington and Jackson.
Yeah.
And I couldn't figure the darn thing out, you know. And I would tell my white friends, do you know any white person named Washington besides George? No. How many Jacksons do you know? I don't know. But then there was an article over the weekend that said when slaves were free, they was such a vacuum as to who they were that they took George Washington's name.
Might as well.
You might as well. Well, if you got to go for the guy on the top. You know, King Washington. But and then as this comes down, at the end of the day, you have no clue as to what part of Africa you should be going in order to find out who are you and who were your people and what do they stand for?
Wasn't Roots a great adventure and keep your eye on the prize and that?
It was, but let me say this. There was no one to... I love the story. That's why I keep after my Indian friends. I said, because... You had more to work with than Alex Haley ever did. All he had was his grandmother. And then he went to Africa and talked with some people.
They had an oral tradition.
Can you imagine, though, what the Indian tribes would be able to contribute to our thinking as to life before Europeans?
Oh, absolutely.
Wouldn't that be an exciting story?
I happen to have done my dissertation on the Aymara people of Bolivia, prehistory of the Bolivian Altiplano. That's a cultural heart, they're people. And we know now, isn't it an amazing time to be alive? Every day there comes a revolution over the transom in one field, and we're learning so much. So it's going exponential. It's really encouraging and so forth. We got the DNA, we got the genome now, these kind of things, and they put on and everything. But we all know now that we're out of Africa. Everybody comes from Africa.
And let me embark on an exciting new thing that is happening. Over the years, whenever I went to Central or South America and you found people of African origin, they were so ashamed of it that they were belligerent about it. And if you were to say, where are you from? What do you mean? I'm from Brazil. I'm from Colombia. You say, yeah, but we're talking about Africa. What do you mean, Africa? He says, well, you're not being treated fairly. What are you, a communist? These are my people. I love singing and dancing. And we'd walk away, you know, the height of the civil rights movement, wondering, what is it in the water that they're drinking? Well, they've changed now. They have studied their history. They are running for public office.
They're becoming president.
Exactly.
Not a bad show.
And this brings in the natives, like in Peru, where the president was an Indian from the mountains and a shoeshine boy.
That's Bolivia.
Yes,
the Aymara people have been treated shabbily ever since Pizarro.
And so
by European incursions.
Exactly.
And that's the story of the world. That's empire.
So I have an idea that I expressed in the Caribbean. They gave me an honor, and I was so impressed because they all acted as though they were British prime ministers. I mean, they really were trained in England. They understood the procedures, the Magna Carta, and all these things. And I reminded them that they cut off everything that we had. Why don't we pick it up? And as the Jewish people found Israel, we can find Haiti. After all, Toussaint Louverture was the first one to get freedom for the slaves, right? So we can come from all over the world and meet in Port-au-Prince. And you tell your story, I'll tell mine.
I would love to. I'd love to. I'm glad he's gone back, Aristide and everything. That's interesting. And terrible natural disasters and so forth in the country of Haiti.
God. I tell Haitians that when they get to heaven, if St. Peter gives them a hard time, you tell them, I'm Haitian. I've served my time.
That'll make them sit up and take notice.
That's
I just had my DNA done. Have you had that done yet?
No.
They do it. National Geographic's doing it now, and they're supporting Spencer Wells. I don't know if you're familiar. He's a geneticist backed by National Geographic. They're trying to get a DNA vision of, everybody agrees almost without exception, we're all African because that's where our species evolved. And they moved out from there. But I had it done. I had the Y chromosome. You just take something off your cheek, and the fellow at Harvard's doing that now, the famous scholar.
Well,
is
didn't
tracing it, even down to individuals.
Reverend Al Sharpton was found connected as a family of Thurman.
Really?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Well, yeah, he's done that. But I had it done. I sent it in, and it came back. And it's scientific, and they got what they call markers, and they can do it. And it goes back 60,000 years.
A
lineage of me as an individual. And they got markers of how you've migrated, or your ancestors have migrated, and it's got scientific validation. And where I was 60,000 years ago, my ancestor was in what's now like Ethiopia. Okay, so they can trace that. Isn't that amazing?
It is exciting
that they can do that sort of thing and we got so many other things. The era is so promising in terms of this communication that's developing. There's reasons to be very positive about the prospect for realizing the full advantage of every single human being, and yet we still are suffering in a world that is fundamentally unjust to so many people. And they haven't got a chance to be able to really express their full capability. There has to be some sort of an alteration at the level of economics or of a arranging of the world society that can give everybody and the ecology a break. And we're having a hard time getting to that because we're reifying perhaps outdated institutions is one of the premises that I would think might be the question. We don't see the qualitative transformation that's taking place, very large qualitative transformation, because we're too busy, and we have to anchor to history, but we're too busy reifying and trying to have the future. Nietzsche once said, the future influences the present as much as the past. But we don't have a future or a vision for how we could have the full potentiality of our technological extension of capability and so forth, benefit everybody and the ecology. We could still blow the whole thing up, couldn't we?
How do we take killing and war off of the table?
I don't know.
Because it appears to me that this is not one of the human instincts. I mean, even animals know how to live together unless it's for their own survival.
You're right. There's very few that really make war on each other. I think rats do, and cockroaches. There's some that do, but by and large, it doesn't come into the question.
And it would seem to me that you and I helping each other out is a gift to each other. It allows us to be able then to help out our families, to help out our communities, to help out our country, and therefore to help out the world. If we could just take the cost of wars and put that aside and see how we could learn to live with each other, to protect the earth that we have held hostage in effect, and to think of ways like, as we are with aging. I mean, I'm 80 years old.
We were supposed to be gone.
Exactly.
Yeah. And we keep living.
Well, that's what the problem is with Social Security, you know.
Right.
Roosevelt said
I'd rather have the living going on than giving them a problem with their, their projections.
You're right.
Yeah.
So we're doing well there, but we still had, as you so well oft-time point out, starvation, poverty, that we're paying for it in the hard way. And there is so much God has given us that if we only took advantage, it wouldn't be a Garden of Eden, but one without war, one with peace, one for improving the quality of life.
In a qualitative. This may be, we did Isaac Asimov once. He's a real great polymath, and he said, this is the defining generation. We've been maybe 10,000 generations. We've been here 10,000 years. This is the defining generation that is going to break with the past, almost like evolution, because we've got weapons, and I do believe, I would like to know and get, as I said, chapter and verse. I believe that if there was an unleashing of weapons that is very dangerous now, they just had a bomb go off in Tel Aviv or something, and that if there was a spasm like 1914 or some sort, it wouldn't have anything to do with irrational, that it would mean the end of our entire species.
What are you suggesting, that during this lifetime that could happen?
Yeah. Yes.
Well, of course, that.
No.
Ever since
but when
World War II, we've had the
We didn't have the
the
capability.
power to destroy the world.
With all due respect, Mr. Rangel, in World War II, we were trying as hard as we could, full tilt, boogie, willow run, kicking out tanks, and we were killing each other as best we possibly could with a great deal of all kinds of very nasty things going on, and we were impotent at the level of species.
Well,
we hadn't gotten there yet.
I wish you would try to explain that to the Japanese that were hit at Hiroshima.
No, I'm talking about wiping out the entire species.
Well,
do you think that's possible?
Yes, of course. When you see what's happening in Japan now, you don't know just how much it could get out of hand, how rapid it could spread. But I was really thinking in terms of the country putting down their arms and finally realizing that destroying somebody else, whether it's a person, a family, or a country, makes you vulnerable for a counterattack. And this is where
that's what they've been fighting.
Yeah.
The enemy's at the gate. And I suppose if you're going in a situation, in a primitive situation, and they're going to come and they're going to they're going to rape all the women. They're at the gate. They're going to rape all the women. They're going to castrate the men. They're going to turn everybody into slaves. And it's either do or die. It's this. Then you would rally to the flag because you have to do. That's what's been going on in the human society, and it's now reached the point where if you have a Gatling gun, you can prevail. You talked about the British and the Scottish Enlightenment. They had a Gatling gun and firepower, and they could divide and conquer the peoples and provide this pattern to empires.
Now, we got to find some way to change this conversation around to...
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to go off.
No. What I'm saying is we got to get a higher note in terms of being optimistic for the future, for our kids and our grandkids.
Absolutely, and we don't hear it.
Yeah.
What would be, and I would suggest, I would get away from it, really, some things like I know you're in favor of the draft and that sort of thing might make a big difference.
Really not. I'm not in favor of the draft. What I really know and think that when presidents and Congresses are deciding that they're going to invade a country or to put young men and women in harm's way, then it should be everyone across the board, not people who enlisted because they needed a job, not people that come from high unemployment area, not just poor folks, and not people seeking an education and willing to take the risk that they will survive.
They ought to be able to get an education just as a given. I mean,
they pay it back.
Yeah, right.
The country is the beneficiary.
Yeah.
I mean, you see what's happening in China and what's happening in India. They're closing that gap.
Yeah, they are. Yeah,
and it would be great if we weren't widening the gap.
Yeah, right.
In terms of our kids not getting out of high school.
And the distribution of income in this country, I think, is more concentrated at the upper levels.
It's
incredible. They just gave all that tax break to them. And so it's more concentrated than it was Louis XIV France. Between the wealthy, the few at the top, and the mass.
The top 1% own 40% of the national wealth.
Right.
And the remainder of the people would have the 1/3 of what is left. And this gap is widening each year, each decade.
And the trend is in that.
The slogan, have and have-nots, where you hear people bragging that half of the people don't pay taxes, we got more people in poverty than ever before in the history of the Republic.
And
children.
It's getting worse. And Lord Keynes warned in the letter to his grandchildren, the one who set up the whole system, the whole international economic system after the Second War and the Depression and Second War, said that in their maturity you're going to be confronted with something that would be about now, the grandchildren. You're going to be confronted with something that's very hard to understand: technologically induced massive unemployment. Now, you get an algorithm that can, in a market term, turn out 50,000 barrels of wheat, and you don't need anybody to drive the machine that does it, and so forth. There's going to be, to distribute income only by labor to the mass of the people. It's all right for some to have capital assets that grow as they sleep, And they do, because it's a wondrous compound interest and everything, but it's confined to the few, and they don't spread ownership out to the general society, even only pragmatically as a way in which we're going to be able to get some demand or buying power into the hands of the people who will not perhaps be able to find a role as a job by which they contribute to production, therefore get value and get money to them. That may be something we have to, and we don't have anything. All we talk about are jobs.
We are in sharp
that's
reverse.
Existential, yeah.
If you can see what's happening in Wisconsin and
Yes,
Indiana,
yes,
where what they're doing in attacking the trade unions have nothing, absolutely nothing to do with the deficit.
Right.
When the
They'll be
unions
coming after Social Security soon, wouldn't they? If
well,
they could?
Of course.
Yeah.
Well, they talk about privatization.
Yeah,
now
yeah.
they're coming back with the same concept. But the whole idea of wiping out collective bargaining,
Yeah.
people just forget that most all of the rights that workers have today,
Right.
people died for them.
Absolutely.
You know,
My
fought.
granddaddy was a union organizer in Detroit.
Well, he
Yeah,
was
yeah.
a hero.
Yeah,
He was
yeah.
the civil rights person at the time.
Right.
And to see what management could do in terms of hiring people to kill the people that were resisting. And now they can take away collective bargaining as though this is something that was just given to people. It's so tragically.
Back to serfdom. The Duke would lose the estate in a crap game with another Duke, and there's so many chickens, so many hogs, so much land, and so many serfs would go along with it.
And the people,
I mean, that's a very bad
the people become
pattern.
the peasants if you don't have a stake in the society,
Right.
as you were pointing out. If you don't have a whole, if you don't have what they now call skin in the game,
Right.
that flag doesn't mean nearly as much to you. And when you find people that are really motivated by profit, that they will benefit another country at the expense of employees
And can
or
do
workers.
it now with the
can do it. We
containerization.
encourage them to
Yeah.
do it.
Right.
The tax system gives them a shelter
Right.
by investing overseas.
Right, and then the way the capital is formed is all favorable to those who are already wealthy.
Well, the
You
wealthy
don't if you haven't got a bunch of collateral behind you, don't even come looking for a loan on something that's good. You know what I mean? It's all concentrated inherently, and it's also just not having some alternative way for the folks, everybody, to have an ownership stake. Now, Mr. Gaddafi did that. He was doing that in his country. Couldn't hire anybody. They had to be the owner of it. Now, there's going to be a lot of people upset with somebody who says you can't hire people, for crying out loud, if you understand, and everything. So that would be part of the upset. There are people who want to exploit people or gain surplus value or something. But he had that. That's one thing people don't realize. He may have been ahead of the curve. And they
well, the concept certainly is one that's it. So you had mentioned earlier how the rich have avoided taxes. And they had received more benefit in the recent president's extension of the Bush tax cuts that were so far outnumbered the benefits that the middle class had received. But after that, the President of the United States went to the American Chamber of Commerce and asked these people to consider investing in the United States of America after the taxpayers had blown them close to $1 trillion. And he's asking them.
Please. Yeah, okay, I know.
It's
well,
awkward.
they're very powerful.
They are.
Because they own the assets that are increasingly responsible for production in real terms. That's a trend that's not going to go away.
Their influence politically is something that the recent Supreme Court decision screams out that the Congress should do something.
Yeah.
Because clearly, if I got the money and you don't, my qualifications don't mean a thing. And yours, you could be the super representative, and I can look at you and you look at my bank account, you better quit.
Yeah, of course.
You better quit.
Well,
because
it's going that way, yeah.
It is going that way. It used to be in the Senate. Now we got millionaires, entrepreneurs coming to the Congress, and of those who don't participate directly, put up the money like the Koch brothers to pick whom they want.
Pretty soon it's going to end up, everything will be owned by the Koch brothers.
And
everybody will be in liege
and the unions are being they're trying to divide the public employees from the private employees.
Divide and conquer.
They said, but at the end of the day, who is the silent people at the table? And I submit to you, and it may cause me to get some bad marks getting into heaven.
Oh, say it, say it.
But I tell you, the silence of the spiritual leaders is really deafening.
It is a moral issue, isn't it? Yeah.
I don't see anything except morality.
Yeah.
If we're talking about birth, if we're talking about the quality of food, if we're talking about health, if we're talking about shelter, if we're talking about not killing people, what could be more spiritual than that?
Yes, sure.
And they're tax exempt, and they're not term limited.
And they've also got the system rigged to where the capital assets are all accumulating by those who already have them. Is there any hope? We mentioned it off camera, maybe, ESOPs, or the idea of having the ownership of the capital formation done in a way where ownership is disseminated widely among the population, maybe even democratically. Is it possible to have a political democracy with an economic plutocracy?
Well,
or which horse leads that part?
I was there when Senator Long was there, and he's the one that had the employee stock option plan, which is what ESOP was all about. And we still have workers that own the companies that they work in. The profits of the firm, their salaries and their dividends. And so the concept can work. But as I was saying, and I too forgot whether it was off on camera, is that we have a tax code now.
It's like you can't, it's unfathomable.
And that operates within the tax code in terms of not taxing the ESOP corporations the same way you would with the other capital-oriented firms. But I don't see how this country can move forward with the preferential treatment that we give so few, and the billions of dollars, if not trillions, that we lose in the tax system each and every day.
Yes, sir.
And when the president comes and says that, I hate to do it, they don't deserve it, there will be no economic growth, no jobs will create it, so therefore, only people that get $250,000 a year will be the beneficiary of the plan. And then the Democrats and Republicans put a gun to his head and said, we will not extend unemployment compensation. We will not allow you to give tax unless you include the top 1%.
Yeah, right. $700 billion.
And he does. And now we're slashing programs as though...
And they'll be targeting Social Security. Those people...
Oh, come on. It's already on the table.
We're in an existential, really challenging moment. I'm really glad that one of the many people who've are at the helm of the ship of state of the world and this country is Charles Rangel from the 15th District of New York. One of the problems in universe and in life is that we don't have enough time. Well, so we're running out of time. I'm really sorry. Thank you very much for coming in. I know you're busy. Congratulations on all the work. Thanks for all the help you've given to public access.
It's a major
means of communication, and let us try to be in touch and communication as we move ahead. Thank you very much for such a well-led life that continues.
You're a great scholar, and it's my honor and privilege to be sitting and talking with you. Thank you.
Thank you for listening. It's your pleasure to have the Perceptions of Charles Rangel. Then a lot of issues that are going on, and this is really a crucial time. It seems that way to me with everything that's going on, and the questions that are being addressed are fundamental ones. I think they could be coming out of the mass movement